So, welcome again. You may not know that Linda asked me after the talk several weeks ago on the masks we wear to talk about this concept of self-worth. And I will try to do that this morning through the lens of the Dharma, because that concept per se did not exist in the Buddha's time. It exists implicitly, but there was no firm discussion or anything called self-worth. According to the American Psychological Association definition, it's self-worth is our evaluation of ourself as a capable and valuable human deserving of consideration and respect. Simply put, it is an internal sense of being worthy of love. And it's really important as we wade into this not to uh, confuse it with this inflated sort of grandiose sense of oneself, this ego-driven self, me, and that's not what we're talking about. It's very distinctive from that. Rather, it includes a balanced view of our strengths and positive traits while realistically acknowledging the shortcomings that we all have and all struggle with. But we do know this, at least from modern studies, that people with positive self-worth tend to have greater self-confidence, greater self-esteem. They sort of navigate more easily through the world. And alternately, when we are experiencing low self-worth, we tend to be judging ourselves harshly. We tend to have a low opinion of ourselves. We're highly critical. We tend to focus on our mistakes and our shortcomings rather than our abilities and strengths. And this is a real vulnerability because remember, as Rick Hansen reminds us, the mind is Teflon for the positive and Velcro for the negative. So we have this negative bias, and it really ends up often impacting our own self-assessment. But we need to remember that neither high self-worth or low self-worth is permanent and fixed. They fluctuate from time to time. We go from feeling pretty good about ourselves to being really not so positive about ourselves. And it really depends on circumstances, both external and internal. In other words, this whole concept of self-worth, at least in the modern sense, is a subjective concept that can fluctuate depending on lots of variables. And so just to give you a sense of that, and I went, when I was researching this, looked at some of the variables that get talked about in the psychological literature that affect self-worth, things like our core beliefs and values and whether we're living by them or not, moment to moment thoughts and feelings, emotions that arise, our experiences and interactions with others and how we judge those as favorable or unfavorable, relationships, past and present, and the messages we take away from those relationships about ourselves, our overall health and physical fitness, our career and professional attainments, activities and hobbies, our communities, our status in the community, our financial position, our physical appearance, childhood experience. The list goes on and on. So obviously self-worth is an incredibly complicated puzzle. And a close cousin to self-worth that we need to also spend a little time on is dignity. So I want to say a few words about that. And it's a word that often implies self-respect. Dignity is often thought of as an intrinsic quality, a part of our human nature, our sort of inherent worth as individuals. And you will recall that dignity is one of the Buddhist virtues as well, because human being and human life is seen as particularly valuable in that context. But coming back to self-worth, I mean, what is it in a system that denies the permanence, the fixed nature of any self? I mean, in Buddhist terms, our self-worth is often a product of our ability to make good choices between right and wrong, between truth and delusion, between seeing things as they are and seeing things that we wish they would be. And these are consequential choices. We know the difference between wholesome and unwholesome acts. And we also know that our actions, be they wholesome or unwholesome, have consequences. If we make skillful choices with discernment, with wisdom, our sense of dignity and self-worth usually will benefit. And if we deliberately follow the Dharma, we can consciously awaken into greater freedom and joy. The potential for seeing things as they truly are, not as we wish them to be, is a one source of self-worth and self-respect. One of the things I found most fascinating in reflecting on this in my own challenges in this area was, I grew up, as you've often heard me say, thinking that living up to the perfectionistic standards of my family was my ticket to self-worth. If I only lived up to those standards, then I could feel good about myself. But not surprisingly, all it did was lessen my self-worth because I always fell short of the standard. I always felt that I wasn't quite making the grade. And over time, and with this practice, as I begin to relax some of those perfectionistic standards, embrace my imperfections, which was really tough given that early conditioning, embrace my flaws, my unskillful traits, the paradox was my self-worth actually began to improve. I know that sounds paradoxical. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but the key there was the growing acceptance of all of who I am. And that's where this practice comes into this modern concept of self-worth. I didn't have to work so hard anymore to hide my flaws, mostly from myself, certainly from others, but mostly from myself. This is the definition of true freedom that the Buddha promised us. When I relaxed and began to experience more freedom in my life because I now was not working so hard to hide the flaws and imperfections that I grew up thinking were shameful and unacceptable. Contrary to popular belief and our cultural messages, self-worth is not the result of our achievements. It's not how many degrees we have on the wall. It's not how much money we have in the bank. We don't get self-worth from our accomplishments, our awards, our income, and all those good things. They are false gods which only keep us chasing, the next brass ring that we think is going to boost our self-worth. So that's the conundrum. That's the dilemma. We think that all this external accomplishment and achievements and success and uh, things we acquire are the ticket, and our culture reinforces that message. We've been talking about that recently, but it's a hollow pursuit. So let me say a few more words about dignity. I want to come back to that for a minute. It's dignity is part of the following of our path with commitment and diligence. That's where we can really experience it. A belief in the intrinsic worth of all is the basis for this modern concept of human rights. And in modern terms, the opposite of dignity is humiliation. And this plays out with real consequences. When people are forced into difficult situations, treated with disrespect, marginalized, they are said to have lost their dignity. People treated poorly do lose self-respect. They come to believe they have no value. They come to be consumed with shame. And others may see people in these harsh conditions as deserving of such treatment, even as being a little less human. This is when we do the othering with people that are different from us. And they may seem to relieve the rest of us of the responsibility of caring for them or acting on their behalf if we marginalize them. But if dignity as part of self-worth is the expression of this intrinsic worth, it cannot be taken away. It cannot be destroyed by the actions of others. It cannot be destroyed even within us. In modern terms, the opposite of dignity is shame, something I often speak about. And in Buddhist terms, dignity and shame are opposites of the same pole. Healthy shame helps us make good choices. It helps support our dignity. It corrects our misbehavior. But toxic shame drains our dignity and drains our self-worth. We feel toxic shame, as I talked about with my perfectionistic standards, when we fall short of those standards. I'm flawed, I'm defective, what's wrong? I'm not living up to what my family told me I should. So our challenge is to avoid harm and unskillful choices, of which healthy shame is one preventative. Healthy shame helps guide us, and that's an important distinction into making better choices. We feel an internal shame when we fall short or have concerns about it, but it need not spill into becoming self-loathing and self-hatred. The base emotions that drive us to right view and right action, both elements of the Eightfold Path, are often that inner sense of dignity. And and for many of us, coming to this practice was because we were feeling toxic shame. We had a desire to change, and we found our way here to do that. Great energy comes into our lives, the energy to choose wholesome acts that keep us from slipping into wrongdoing. And this becomes a source of self-worth and reaffirms our self, not achievements, not accomplishments. We are pained by our mistakes, but for the right reasons. We don't beat ourselves up. We don't engage in a lot of second arrow, but we make a course correction. This is healthy shame. A sense of contrition and remorse about a mistake doesn't have to mean self-hatred unless we load it up with second arrow stories, but it instead can arise out of a genuine desire to do good, to do better the next time. This drives us towards virtuous acts with more care, with more wisdom, and more discernment. So dignity allows us to come forward rather than trying to hide our mistakes and flaws. We are open about our flaws, our mistakes, our missteps, and that is another definition of freedom. We're not expending energy trying to cover all that stuff up. It's why I said earlier that self-worth requires an honest embracing of our shortcomings, not running from them, disguising them, pretending they're not there. We allow ourselves to be seen, to say, see, this is who I am, warts and all. I'm a complicated human being. And over time, our behavior becomes naturally more modest because we're avoiding impulsive, unskillful actions. We know from neuroscience that impulsivity is a function of not putting a pause between the thought and the impulse to act. When we act impulsively, very often we act unskillfully. The pause is the thing that gives us choices. It gives us agency. And when we make a mistake, it's a reminder of our goal to be better, to do better next time. There's a collection of early stories in the Buddha's life known as the Jata Kamala, which teaches that followers of the Dharma behave appropriately because they have this sense of having made a mistake. They have a sense of self-correction. It's not called self-worth in those ancient teachings, but it's clearly the direction, I think, in which that story points. If we have a sense of self-worth and dignity, we can say, I'm sorry, I don't know, I was wrong, without having to worry about protecting the ego and protecting ourselves from being exposed as somehow less than perfect. We don't blame, we don't make excuses, we embrace those things, and that's a real path to freedom. Dogen, the 13th century Japanese monk, wrote that we should, quote, learn of dignified behavior as the whole cosmos and dignified behavior as the whole earth. Dignified behavior is the whole cosmos and dignified behavior is the whole earth. So in conclusion, let me just say that Buddhism in this path offers a profound and transformative perspective on self-worth. It challenges conventional notions of, getting that by external trappings, by accomplishments, and so forth. It emphasizes the impermanence and interconnectedness of all things. So by embracing our mindfulness practice, our compassion, our detachment to some extent from material gain, we embark on a journey toward a more authentic sense of self-worth, a more core sense. In Buddhist understanding, self-worth is not the static possession, but a dynamic realization of one's inherent nature in harmony with this ever-changing tapestry of existence. Okay, we're in the flow of this impermanent nature of existence. So anyway, I hope I answered Linda's question. She can tell me if I did or didn't, and shed a little light on this concept of self-worth, this modern concept, as it relates to the Dharma. So let me stop there and get your thoughts on